Hello, 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 everyone. Good evening. Happy Sunday to you. You all, it is November 17th. I'm going to say that again. It is November 17th. You all, it feel like we just started November. Oh my goodness, man. We are in November, in the middle of November, almost to the end. I don't know about you all. It may be some technical things going on the video side but nevertheless, if you can hang in there, hopefully it'll fix itself. But I have good signal on my side as far as the connection goes, but it may be the platform that I'm using, so they may be experiencing some glitches, but nonetheless, we are here. That is the beauty of airing on multiple platforms. We are on Clubhouse, we are on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. We're all over the place, you all. And I thank you for your presence here with us on Divine Femininity United. I am your host and your reader, Dr. Bianca Miss B. Lee. And we are journeying through the amazing book, you all, the amazing, phenomenal book, The Shack. The Shack. If you have seen the movie, then you already know what it's about. But if you have never ever seen the movie nor read the book, that is what we're doing right now. So we're taking 2 chapters at a time. And today we are on chapters 8 and 9. So chapter 8 is A Breakfast of Champions, and chapter 9 is A Long Time Ago in a Garden Far, Far Away. Okay. So the last couple of chapters that we read, Mack, who is our main character, Mackenzie Allen Philips, you all, just to remind you, this is based on true events, okay? This is the story as told by Mackenzie and written by William Young, okay? So William Young is the best friend of Mackenzie. And so this is Mackenzie's story. And so Mackenzie is recanting pretty much his events that he experienced. Okay, so we've made it through a lot of different experiences here, a lot of different elements here. He's gone through abuse as a child. He went through witnessing his mom be abused. He went through leaving home as a child and then going off to experience the world, military, all types of things, travel experiences. He has now a wife, and they shared 5 children. Um, One day, the youngest of the children, Missy, was abducted and then is speculated to have been murdered. They found her bloody clothes and things like that inside of a shack, okay, an abandoned shack. And so years later, about 3.5 years later, to be exact, Mackenzie, Mack, the father, he received an anonymous letter in the mail, no return address, no stamp, no nothing in the mail, inviting him to come back to the shack. The shack is where his abducted daughters' bloodied clothes and things like that were found. So, of course, thinking of the shack is bringing back so much anger and emotion and sadness and all kind of things, but something was pulling him and tugging him towards going back to the shack. So he went. And when he went, he is experiencing right now. We're in the middle of his experience at the shack. So he's experiencing right now what he never thought he could even fathom. And he's still trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Okay. So in chapters 6 and 7, he was met there by God, by the God whose name is Elucia, but goes by Papa, and who just happens to be a voluptuous Black woman. Okay. Then Sarayu, who is representative of the Holy Spirit, is represented by an Asian woman. And then you have Jesus, who's represented by an Indian or Arabian man, who is also known as, he says, Jesse, Yeshua, Joshua. Yes. So So Mackenzie has spent time with Papa in the kitchen, where he was really, really angry and really, 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 really expressing it. And God gave him the patience to do so, and explain to him some things or whatever, which kind of soothed him a little bit. But he still, got some things to work through. Then they had dinner, and he learned a lot about different things, and he experienced a lot, about how understanding they were, about how open they were to hear him and see his life and experience his life through his lens. Of course, they are all knowing. However, they weren't trying to show how all knowing they were while sharing time with him. They wanted to see his life through his lens. So they asked him questions about his family, his children, and things like that. And I wanted to experience it on his level, from his level, which I thought was amazing, and how important it is for us to give people space to experience, to share from their lens, and then we receive it from their lens, because we can assume that we know what they're feeling, how excited or sad or angry or what they go through, but we will never know unless we actually hear their perspective, and not be so quick to give them a perspective to have, right? Actually just hear theirs. And that was amazing. That was a nugget I walked away with on that chapter. But then also, after dinner, after they cleaned up and things like that, him and Jesus went out on the dock, and they had some time watching the stars and just having a pretty much a man-to-man conversation. And I say that twofold: man-to-man, because Jesus is the man in here, in the trio, but also man-to-man, meaning Jesus, out of the three of them, was the one that actually experienced life as man, and so he could fully understand Mack in his manness, in his human state, in his human form. He can understand him from the experiential, standpoint. It's like, really, no, I understand you. I get you. I was there. So, and Max actually finds himself relating to Jesus, so far more so than he did with Papa or Sarayu. So now we are on chapter 8, Breakfast of Champions. And then we're going to go into chapter 9, A Long Time Ago in a Garden Far, Far Away. Now, at any point you hear anything, hopefully the technical glitches will, correct themselves as we go along, and it doesn't deter you from listening in. But in any case, I'm going to just forge ahead. If you want to actually just, ensure that you are not having any other issues, or you want to listen uninterrupted, feel free to go to some of the other platforms and feel free to tune in that way if you're having issues on your platform that you're currently listening from. But in any case, if you're okay, then, if you have any questions or you want to give some insights or revelations that you're receiving as we go along in this book, use the comment section. I'll be able to hear, I'll be able to share, read your thoughts and things like that as we go along. I'll periodically be looking at the chat, at the comments and things like that, as we read. But, feel free to use that for your notes and your insights and whatnot. We would love to hear them, okay? Alrighty, you all, without further ado, here we go. This is The Shack, and we are on chapter 8, A Breakfast of Champions. This is a quote from an author unknown, and it states, "Growth means change, and change involves risk. Stepping from the known to the unknown." That is so true. When he reached his room, Mack discovered that his clothes, which he had left back in the car, were either folded on top of the dresser or hung in the open closet. To his amusement, he also found a Gideon's Bible in the nightstand. He opened the window wide to let the outside night flow freely in, something that Nan never tolerated at home because of her fear of spiders and anything else crawly and creepy. Snuggling like a small child deep inside the heavy down comforter, he had only made it through a couple verses before the Bible somehow left his hand. The light somehow turned off. Someone kissed him on the cheek, and he was lifting gently off the ground in a flying dream. Those who have never flown this way might think those who believe they do rather daft, but secretly they are probably at least a little envious. He hadn't had a flying dream in years, not since the great sadness had descended. But tonight, Mac flew high into the starlit night, the air clear and cool, but not uncomfortable. He soared above lakes and rivers, crossing an ocean coast and a number of reef rimmed islets. As odd as it sounds, Mac had learned inside his dreams to fly like this, to lift off the ground supported by nothing, no wings, no aircraft of any sort, just himself. Beginning flights were usually limited to a few inches, due almost to fear, or more accurately, a dread of falling. Stretching his flights to a foot or two and eventually higher increased his confidence, as did his discovery that crashing wasn't painful at all, but only a slow motion bounce. In time, he learned to ascend into the clouds, cover vast distances, and land gently. As he soared at will over rugged mountains and crystal white seashores, reveling in the mist wonder of dream flight, suddenly something grabbed him by the ankle and tore him out of the sky. In a matter of seconds, he was dragged from the heights and violently thrown face first onto a muddy and deeply rutted road. Thunder shook the ground and rain instantly drenched him to the bone. And there it came again, lightning illuminating the face of his daughter as she soundlessly screamed, "Daddy!" and then turned to run into the darkness, her red dress visible only for a few brief flashes and then gone. He fought with all his strength to extricate himself from the mud and the water, only succeeding in being sucked deeper into its grasp. And just as he was being taken under, he woke with a gasp. With his heart racing and his imagination anchored in the nightmare's images, it took a few moments for Mac to realize it had only been a dream. But even as it faded from his consciousness, the emotions didn't go with it. The dream had provoked the great sadness, and before he could even get out of bed, he was once again fighting his way through the despair that had devoured too many of his days. With a grimace, he looked around the room in the dull gray of the growing dawn that snuck in around the window shades. This wasn't his bedroom. Nothing looked or felt familiar. Where was he? Think, Mac, think. Then he remembered. He was still at the shack with those three interesting characters, all of whom thought they were God. This can't really be happening. Mac grunted as he pulled his feet out of bed and sat on its edge with his head in his hands. He thought back to the previous day and again entertained the fear that he was going crazy. As he had never been much of a touchy-feely person, Papa, whoever she was, made him nervous, and he had no idea what to make of Sarayu. He admitted to himself that he liked Jesus a lot, but he seemed the least godlike of the three. He let out a deep, heavy sigh. And if God was really here, why hadn't he taken his nightmares away? Sitting in a quandary, he decided wasn't helping. So he found his way to the bathroom where, to his amusement, everything he needed for a shower had been carefully laid out for him. He took his time in the warmth of the water, took his time shaving, and back in the bedroom, took his time dressing. The penetrating and alluring aroma of coffee drew his eye to the steaming cup awaiting for him on the end table by the door. Taking a sip, he opened the shades and stood looking out through his bedroom window onto the lake, which he'd only glimpsed as a shadow the night before. It was perfect, smooth as glass, except for the occasional trout leaping after its breakfast, sending circles of miniature waves radiating across the deep blue surface until they were slowly absorbed back into the larger surface. He established the far side was about a half-mile away. Dew sparkled everywhere, diamond-like tears of the early morning reflecting the sun's love. The 3 canoes resting easily at intervals along the dock looked inviting, but Max shrugged off the thought. Canoes were no longer a joy. Too many bad memories. The dock reminded him of the night before. Had he really lain out there with the one who made the universe? Max shook his head, dumbfounded. What was going on here? Who were they really, and what did they want from him? Whatever it was, he was sure he didn't have it to give. The smell of eggs and bacon mixed with something else curled into his room, interrupting his thoughts. Mac decided it was time to emerge and speak for his share. As he entered the main living area, he heard the sound of a familiar Bruce Cockburn tune drifting from the kitchen and a high-pitched black woman singing along rather well. Oh, love that fires the sun, keep me burning. Papa emerged with plates in each hand full of pancakes and fried potatoes and greens of some sort. She was dressed in a long, flowing African-looking garment, complete with a vibrant, multicolored headband. She looked radiant, almost glowing. You know, she exclaimed, I love that child's song. I am especially fond of Bruce, you know. She looked over at Mac, who was just sitting down at the table. Mac nodded, his appetite increasing by the second. Yep, she continued, and I know you like him too. Mac smiled. It was true. Cockburn had been a family favorite for years. First his and Nan's, and then each of the children to one degree or another. So, honey, Papa asked, continuing busily with whatever she was doing, how were your dreams last night? Dreams are sometimes important, you know. They can be a way of opening up the window and letting the bad air out. Mac knew this was an invitation to unlock the door into his terrors, but at the moment he wasn't ready to invite her into that hole within him. I slept fine, thank you, he responded, and then quickly changed the subject. Is he your favorite? Bruce, I mean. She stopped and looked at him. Forgive my dog. Mackenzie, I have no favorites. I'm just especially fond of him. You seem to be especially fond of a lot of people, Mac observed with a suspicious look. Are there any who you are not especially fond of? She lifted her head and rolled her eyes as if she were mentally going through the catalog of every being ever created. Nope, I haven't been able to find any. Guess that's just the way I is. Mac was interested. Do you ever get mad at any of them? Sure enough. What parents don't? There's a lot to be mad about in the mess my kids have made and in the mess they're in. I don't like a lot of choices they make, but that anger, especially for me, is an expression of love all the same. I love the ones I'm angry with just as much as those I'm not. But, Mac paused, what about your wrath? It seems to me that if you're going to pretend to be God Almighty, you need to be a lot angrier. Do I now? That's what I think. Weren't you always running around killing people in the Bible? You just don't seem to fit the bill. I understand how disorienting all this must be for you, Mac, but the only one pretending here is you. I am what I am. I'm not trying to fit anyone's bill. But you're asking me to believe that you're God, and I just don't see it. Mac had no idea how to finish the sentence, so he just gave up. I'm not asking you to believe anything, but I will tell you that you're going to find this day a lot easier if you simply accept what is, instead of trying to fit it into your preconceived notions. But if you are God, aren't you the one spilling out great bowls of wrath and throwing people into burning lakes of fire? Mac could feel his deep anger emerging again, pushing out the questions in front of it. And he was a little chagrined at his own lack of self-control. But he asked anyway, honestly, don't you enjoy punishing those who disappoint you? At that, Papa stopped her preparations and turned toward Mac. He could see a deep sadness in her eyes. I am not who you think I am, Mackenzie. I don't need to punish people for sin. Sin is its own punishment, devouring you from the inside, It's not my purpose to punish it. It's my joy to cure it. I don't understand. You're right. You don't, she said with a smile still sad around its edges. But then again, we're not done yet. Just then, Jesus and Sarayu entered laughing through the back door, involved in their own conversation. Jesus came in dressed much like the day before, just jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that made his brown eyes stand out. Sarayu, on the other hand, was clothed in something so fine and lacy that it fairly flowed at the slightest breeze or spoken word. Rainbow patterns shimmered and reshaped with her every gesture. Mack wondered if she ever completely stopped moving. He rather doubted it. Papa leaned down to eye level with Mack. You raised some important questions and we'll get around to them, I promise. But now, let's enjoy breakfast together. Mack nodded, again a little embarrassed as he turned his attention to the food. He was hungry anyway, and there was plenty to eat. Thank you for breakfast, he told Papa while Jesus and Sarayu were taking their seats. What? She said in a mock horror. You aren't even going to bow your head and close your eyes? She began walking toward the kitchen, grumbling as she went. Tisk, tisk, tisk. What is the world coming to? You're welcome, honey. As she waved over her shoulder, she returned a moment later with still another bowl of steaming something that smelled wonderful and inviting. They passed the food to one another, and Mack was spellbound, watching and listening as Papa joined in the conversation Jesus and Sarayu were having. It had something to do with reconciling an estranged family, but it wasn't what they were talking about that captured Mack. It was how they related. He never had seen three people share with such simplicity and beauty. Each seemed more aware of the others than of themselves. So, what do you think, Mack? Jesus asked, gesturing toward him. I have no idea what you're talking about, said Mack with his mouth half full of very tasty greens. But I love the way that you do it. Whoa, said Papa, who had returned from the kitchen with yet another dish. Take it easy on those greens, young man. Those things can give you the trots if you ain't careful. All right, said Mack. I'll try to remember, as he reached for the dish in her hand. Then turning back to Jesus, he added, I love the way you treat each other. It's certainly not how I expected God to be. How do you mean? Well, I know that you are one and all, and that there are three of you, but you respond with such graciousness to each other. Isn't one of you more the boss than the other two? The three looked at each other as if they had never thought of such a question. I mean, Mack hurried on, I've always thought of God the Father as sort of being the boss and Jesus as the one following orders, being obedient. I'm not sure how the Holy Spirit fits in exactly. She, uh, Mack tried not to look at Sarayu as he stumbled for words. Whatever. The Spirit always seemed kind of a free spirit, offered Papa. Exactly, a free spirit, but still under the direction of the Father. Does that make sense? Jesus looked over at Papa, obviously trying with some difficulty to maintain the perception of a very serious exterior. Does that make sense to you, Abba? Frankly, I haven't a clue what this man is talking about. Papa scrunched her face up as if exerting great concentration. Nope. I've been trying to make head or tails out of it, but sorry, he's got me lost. You know what I'm talking about. Mack was a little frustrated. I'm talking about who's in charge. Don't you have a chain of command? Chain of command. That sounds ghastly, Jesus said. At least binding, Papa added as they both started laughing, and then Papa turned to Mack and sang, though chains be of gold, they are chains all the same. Now, don't concern yourself with those two, Sarayu interrupted, reaching out her hand to comfort and calm him. They're just playing with you. This is actually a subject of interest among us. Mack nodded and relieved and a little chagrined that he had again allowed himself to lose his composure. Mackenzie, we have no concept of final authority among us. only unity. We are in a circle of relationship, not a chain of command or great chain of being, as your ancestors termed it. What you're seeing here is relationship without any overlay of power. We don't need power over the other because we are always looking out for the best. Hierarchy would make no sense among us. Actually, there is your problem. That this is your problem, not ours. Really? How so? Humans are so lost and damaged that to you it is almost incomprehensible that people could work or live together without someone being in charge. But every human institution that I can think of, from political to business, even down to marriage, is governed by this kind of thinking. It is the web of our social fabric, Mack asserted. Such a waste, said Papa, picking up the empty dish and heading for the kitchen. It's one reason why experiencing true relationship is so difficult for you, added Jesus. Once you have a hierarchy, you need rules to protect and administer it. And then you need law and the enforcement of the rules. And you end up with some kind of chain of command or a system of order that destroys relationship rather than promotes it. You rarely see experience relationship apart from power. Hierarchy imposes laws and rules, and you end up missing the wonder of relationship that we intended for you. Well, as Mack sarcastically sitting back in his chair, we sure seem to have adapted pretty well to it. Sarayu was quick to reply. Don't confuse adaptation for intention or seduction for reality. So then, could you please pass me a bit more of those greens? So then, we've been seduced into this preoccupation with authority. In a sense, yes, responded Papa, passing Mac the platter of greens, but not letting go until he pulled twice. I'm just looking out for you, son. Sarayu continued. When you choose independence over relationship, you become a danger to each other. Others became objects to be manipulated or managed for your own happiness. Authority, as you usually think of it, is merely the excuse to strong use the excuse the strong use to make others conform to what they want. Okay, I'm gonna say that again. Authority, as you usually think of it, is merely the excuse the strong use to make others conform to what they want. Isn't it helpful in keeping people from fighting endlessly or getting hurt? Sometimes. But in a selfish world, it is also used to inflict great harm. But don't you use it to to restrain evil? We carefully respect your choices. So we work within your systems even while we seek to free you from them. Papa continued. Creation has been taken down a very different path than we desired. In your world, the value of the individual is constantly weighed against the survival of the system, whether political, economic, social, or religious. Any system, actually. First one person, and then a few, and finally, even many are easily sacrificed for the good and ongoing existence of that system. In one form or another, this lies behind every struggle for power, every prejudice, every war, and every abuse of relationship. The will to power and independence has become so ubiquitous that it is now considered normal. It's not. It is the human paradigm, added Papa, having returned with more food. It is like water to fish, so prevalent that it goes unseen and unquestioned. It is the matrix, a diabolical scene in which you are hopelessly trapped even while completely unaware of its existence. Jesus picked up the conversation. As the crowning glory of creation, you were made in our image, unencumbered by structure and free to simply be in relationship with me and one another. If you had truly learned to regard each other's concerns as significant as your own, there would be no need for hierarchy. Max sat back in his chair, staggered by the implications of what he was hearing. So, are you telling me that whenever we humans protect ourselves with power, you are yielding to the matrix, not to us. Jesus finished. And now, Sarah, you injected, we have come full circle back to one of my initial statements. You humans are so lost and damaged that to you it is almost incomprehensible that relationship could exist apart from hierarchy. So you think that God must relate it's inside a hierarchy like you do, but we do not. But how could we ever change that? People will just use us. They most likely will. But we're not asking you to do it with others, Mac. We're asking you to do it with us. That's the only place it can begin. We won't use you, Mac, said Papa with an intensity that caused him to listen very carefully. We want to share with you the love and joy and freedom and light that we already know within ourselves. We created you, the human, to be in face-to-face relationship with us, to join our circle of love. As difficult as it will be for you to understand, everything that has taken place is occurring exactly according to this purpose without violating choice or will. How can you say that with all the pain in this world, all the wars and disasters that destroy thousands? Mac's voice quieted to a whisper. And what is the value in a little girl being murdered by some twisted deviant? There it is again, the question that lay burning in a hole in his soul. You may not cause those things, but you certainly don't stop them. Mackenzie, Papa answered tenderly, seemingly not offended in the least by his accusation. There are millions of reasons to allow pain and hurt and suffering rather than to eradicate them. But most of those reasons can only be understood within each person's story. I am not evil. You are the ones who embrace fear and pain and power and right so readily in your relationships. But your choices are also not stronger than my purposes. And I will use every choice you make for the ultimate good and the most loving outcome. You see, interjected Sarayu, broken humans center their lives around things that seem good to them, but that will neither fill them nor free them. They are addicted to power or the illusion of security and power that power offers. When a disaster happens, those same people will turn against the false powers they trusted. In their disappointment, they either become softened toward me or they become bolder in their independence. If you could only see how all of this ends and what we will achieve without the violation of one human will, then you would understand. One day you will. But the cost, Mac was staggered. Look at the cost, all the pain, all the suffering, everything that is so terrible and evil. He paused and looked down at the table. And look what it has cost you. Is it worth it? Yes, came the unanimous, joyful response of all three. But how can you say that? Mac blurted. It all sounds like the end justifies the means. That to get what you want will go to any length, even if it costs the lives of billions of people. Mackenzie, it was the voice of Papa again, especially gentle and tender. You really don't understand yet. You try to make sense of the world in which you live based on a very small and incomplete picture of reality. It is like looking at a parade through the tiny knothole of hurt, pain, and self-centeredness and power, and believing you are on your own and insignificant. All of these contain powerful lies. You see pain and death as ultimate evils, and God as the ultimate betrayer, or perhaps at best, as fundamentally untrustworthy. You dictate the terms and judge my actions and find me guilty. The really underlying flaw in your life, Mackenzie, is that you don't think that I am good. If you knew I was good and that everything, the means, the ends, and all of the processes of individual lives is all covered by my goodness, then while you might not always understand what I'm doing, you would trust me, but you don't. I don't, asked Mack. But it was not really a question. It was a statement of fact, and he knew it. The others seemed to know it too, and the table remained silent. Sarah, you spoke. Mackenzie, you cannot produce trust just like you cannot do humility. It either is or is not. Trust is the fruit of a relationship in which you know you are loved. Because you do not know that I love you, you cannot trust me. Again, there was a silence. And finally, Mack looked up at Papa and spoke. I don't know how to change that. You can't. Not alone. But together we will watch that change take place. For now, I just want you to be with me and discover that our relationship is not about performance or you having to please me. I'm not a bully, not some self-centered, demanding little deity insisting on my way. I'm good, and I desire only what is best for you. You cannot find that through guilt or condemnation or coercion, only through a relationship of love. And I do love you. Sarah, you stood up from the table and looked directly at Mack. Mackenzie, she offered, if you care to, I would like you to come and help me in the garden. There are things I need to do there before tomorrow's celebration. We can continue relevant elements of this conversation there, please. Sure, Mackenzie responded and excused himself from the table. One last comment, he added, turning back. I just can't imagine any final outcome that would justify all this. Mackenzie, Papa rose out of her chair and walked around the table to give him a big squeeze. We're not justifying it. We are redeeming it. That's good. That was chapter 9. Chapter 8. That was chapter 8. All right, here we go. Chapter 9. That was really, really good. I think those questions that he asked were very important to ask because I think that more of us, we did not, some of us may have not experienced what he experienced as far as, the murder of his daughter, but I think a lot of us share in those questions in terms of asking God, because the image of who God is and how God moves, even from written text, i.e. the Bible, it's depicted as God being full of wrath and full of, obey me or else, bow down or else, is that type of energy. But what I'm seeing here as I'm reading is that that's never been God. That's been the image of God through the lens of man, through the heart of man, through the dysfunctions of man, through the rage of man, through the through the immaturity of man, through the underdevelopment of man. It's been through the selfish motives, the self-centeredness of man. So instead of us elevating ourselves to view God as is, we've made God how we think God should be, and it's depicted in because the books, you all, are written by man. They're written by man. They are written by man. And what we're reading in the books are man's version of how they experienced what they called God. Their experience, not our own. And yet, that book and others' experiences has been the playbook of how we operate or how we should move and live. Whoo, my goodness. So it boils down to, do we really know God? I've been asking this question for such a long time. I am convinced that the way that we treat one another, especially, even from the churches and the faiths and religions and all of that stuff, even from those platforms, the way that we treat each other, I am convinced that we don't really know God. I don't care how often you preach and say God's name and quote a scripture and pay your tithes and offering. The way that we treat each other, see each other, feel about each other, think about each other, man. Wow. All right, chapter 9. Here we go. It is entitled A Long Time Ago in a Garden Far, Far Away. There's a quote here by Henry Van Dyke, and it states, "Even should we find another Eden, we would not be fit to enjoy it perfectly, nor stay in it forever." Mack followed Sarayu as best he could out the back door and down the walkway past the row of firs. To walk behind such a being was like tracking a sunbeam. Light seemed to radiate through her and then reflect her presence in multiple places at once. Her nature was rather ethereal, full of dynamic shades and hues of color and motion. No wonder so many people are a little unnerved at relating to her, Mack thought. She obviously is not a being who is predictable. Mack concentrated instead on staying on the walkway. As he rounded the trees, he saw for the first time a magnificent garden, an orchard somehow contained within a plot of land hardly larger than an acre. For whatever reason, Mack had expected a perfectly manicured and ordered English garden. This was not that. It was chaos in color. His eyes tried unsuccessfully to find some order in this blatant disregard for certainty. Dazzling sprays of flowers were blasted through patches of randomly planted vegetables and herbs, vegetation the likes of which Mack had never seen. It was confusing, stunning, and incredibly beautiful. From above, it's a fractal, Sarayu said over her shoulder with an air of pleasure. "A what?" asked Mack absent-mindedly, his mind still trying to grapple with and control the pandemonium of sight and the movements of hues and shades. Every step he took changed whatever patterns he, for an instant, thought he had seen, and nothing was like it had been. A fractal, something considered simple and orderly that is actually composed of repeated patterns, no matter how magnified. A fractal is almost infinitely complex. I love fractals, so I put them everywhere. "Looks like a mess to me," muttered Mack under his breath. Sarayu stopped and turned to Mack, her face glorious. "Mack, thank you. What a wonderful compliment." She looked around at the garden. "That is exactly what this is, a mess. But," she looked back at Mack and beamed, "it's still a fractal too." Sarayu walked straight to a certain herb plant, plucked some heads off it, and turned to Mack. "Here," she said, her voice sounding more like music than anything else. "Papa wasn't kidding at breakfast. You'd better chew on these greens for a few minutes. It will counteract the natural movement of the ones you overindulged in earlier, if you know what I mean." Mack chuckled as he accepted and carefully began to chew. "Yeah, but those greens tasted so good." His stomach had begun to roll a little, and being kept off balance by the verdant the wildness he had stepped into and was not helping. The flavor of the herb was not distasteful. A hint of mint and some other spices he had probably smelled before, but couldn't identify. As they walked, the growling in his stomach slowly began to subside, and he relaxed what he hadn't realized he had been clenching. Without speaking a word, he tried to follow Sarayu from place to place within the garden, but found himself easily distracted by the blends of colors. Currant and vermilion reds, tangerine and chartreuse, divided by platinum and fuchsia, as well as innumerable shades of greens and browns. It was all wonderfully bewildering and intoxicating. Sarayu seemed to be intently focused on a particular task. But like her name, she wafted about like a playful Edian wind, and he never quite knew which way she was blowing. He found it rather difficult to keep up with her. It reminded him of trying to follow Nan in a mall. She moved through the garden, snipping off various plants and flowers and herbs and handing them to Mack to carry. The makeshift bouquet grew quite large, a pungent mass of perfume. The mixtures of aromatic spices were unlike anything he had ever smelled, and they were so strong he could almost taste them. They deposited the final bouquet inside the door of a small garden shop that Mack had not noticed before, buried as it was in a thicket of wild growth, including vines and what Mack thought were weeds. One task done, Sarah you announced, and one to go. She handed Mack a shovel, rake, and a scythe, and a pair of gloves, and floated out and down and particularly overgrown path that seemed to go in the general direction of the far end of the garden. Along the way, she would occasionally slow to touch this plant or that flower, all the while humming the haunting tune that Mack had been captivated by the evening before. He followed obediently, carrying the tools he had been given and trying to keep her in sight while wondering at his surroundings. When she stopped, Mack almost ran into her, distracted as he was looking around. Somehow she had changed, now dressed in work clothes, jeans with wild designs, a work shirt and gloves. They were in an area that could have been an orchard, but not really. Regardless, the place they stood was an open spot surrounded on three sides by peach and cherry trees, and in the middle was a cascade of purple and yellow flowered bushes that almost took his breath away. Mackenzie, she pointed directly at the incredible purple and yellow patch. I would like your help clearing this entire plot of ground. There is something very special that I want to plant here tomorrow, and we need to get it ready. She looked at Mack and reached for the scythe. You can't be serious. This is so gorgeous and in such a secluded spot. But Siriu didn't seem to notice. Without further explanation, she turned and began destroying the artistic display of flowers. She cut cleanly, seemingly without any effort. Max shrugged, donned his gloves, and began raking into piles the havoc she was wreaking. He struggled to keep up. It might not be a strain for her, but for him, it was labor. 20 minutes later, the plants were all cut off at the roots, and the plot looked like a wound in the garden. Max's forearms were etched with cut marks from the branches he had piled in one spot. He was out of breath and sweating, glad to be finished. Sarayu stood over the plot, examining their handiwork. Isn't this exhilarating? She asked. I've been exhilarated in better ways, Mack retorted sarcastically. Oh, Mackenzie, if you only knew. It's not the work, but the purpose that makes it special. And she smiled at him. It's the only kind I do. Mack leaned on his rake and looked around the garden and then at the red welts on his arms. Sarayu, I know you are the creator, but did you make the poisonous plants, stinging nettles, and mosquitoes too? Mackenzie, responded Sarayu, seeming to move in tandem with the breezes. A created being can only take what already exists and from it fashion something different. So you're saying that you created everything that actually exists, including what you consider the bad stuff. Sarayu completed his sentence. But when I created it, it was only good because that is just the way I am. She seemed to almost billow into a curtsy before resuming her task. But Mackenzie continued, not satisfied. Then why has so much of the good gone bad? Now, Sarah, you paused before answering. You humans, so little in your own eyes. You are truly blind to your own place in the creation. Having chosen the ravaged path of independence, you don't even comprehend that you are dragging the entire creation along with you. She shook her head, and the wind sighed through the trees nearby. So very sad, but it won't be this way forever. They enjoyed a few moments of silence as Mac looked back toward the various plants that he could see from where they were standing. So, are there plants in this garden that are poisonous? He asked. Oh, yes, exclaimed Sarah Yu. They are some of my favorites. Some are even dangerous to the touch, like this one. She reached for a nearby bush and snapped off something that looked like a dead stick with only a few tiny leaves budding from the stem. She handed it to Mac, who raised both hands to avoid touching it. Sarah, you laughed. I am here, Mac. There are times when it is safe to touch and times when precautions must be taken. That is the wonder and adventure of exploration, a piece of what you call science, to discern and discover what we have hidden for you to find. So, why did you hide it? Mac inquired. Why do children love to hide and seek? Ask any person who has a passion to explore and discover and create. The choice to hide so many wonders from you is an act of love that is a gift inside the process of life. Mac gingerly reached out and took the poisonous twig. If you had not told me this was safe to touch, would it had poisoned me? Of course. But if I direct you to touch, that is different. For any created being, autonomy is lunacy. Freedom involves trust and obedience inside a relationship of love. So if you are not hearing my voice, it would be wise to take the time to understand the nature of the plant. So why create a poisonous plant at all? Mac queried, handing back the twig. Your question presumes that poison is bad, that such creations have no purpose. Many of these so called bad plants, like this one, contain incredible properties that for healing or are necessary for some of the most magnificent wonders when combined with something else. Humans have a great capacity for declaring something good or evil without truly knowing. Obviously, the short break, which had been for Mac's sake, was over, and Sarah Yu thrust a hand shovel at Mac, picking up the rake. To prepare this ground, we must dig up the roots of all the wonderful growth that was here. It was hard work, but well worth it. If the roots are not here, then they cannot do what comes naturally and harm the seed we will plant. Okay, Matt grunted as they both got down on their knees alongside the freshly cleared plot. Sarah, you was somehow able to reach deep under the ground and find the ends of the roots, bringing them effortlessly to the surface. She left the shorter ones for Mac, so who used the hand shovel to dig under and pull them up. They then shook the dirt from the roots and threw them onto one of the piles that Mac had earlier raked together. I'll burn those later, she said. You were talking earlier about humans declaring good and evil without knowledge. Mac asked, shaking another root of its dirt. Yes, I was specifically talking about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Asked Mac. Exactly, she stated, seeming to almost expand and contract for emphasis while she worked. And now, Mackenzie, you are beginning to see why eating the deadly fruit of that tree was so devastating to your race. I've never given it much thought, really, said Mac, intrigued by the direction their chat was taking. So, was there really an actual garden? I mean, Eden and all that? Of course. I told you I have a thing for gardens. That's going to bother some people. There are lots of people who think it was only a myth. Well, their mistake isn't fatal. Rumors of glory are often hidden inside of what many consider myths and tales. Oh, I've got some friends who are not going to like this, Mac observed as he wrestled with a particular stubborn root. No matter, I myself am very fond of them. I'm so surprised, Mac said a little sarcastically and smiled in her direction. Okay, then. He drove his shovel into the dirt, grabbing the root above it with his hand. So tell me about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is what we were talking about at breakfast, she responded. Let me begin by asking you a question. When something happens to you, how do you determine whether it is good or evil? Mac thought for a moment before answering. Well, I haven't really thought about that. I guess I would say that something is good when I like it and when it makes me feel good or gives me a sense of security. Conversely, I call something evil that causes me pain or costs me something I want. So it is pretty subjective then. I guess it is. And how confident are you in your ability to discern what indeed is good for you or what is evil? To be honest, said Mack, I tend to sound justifiably angry when somebody is threatening my good, you know, what I think I deserve. But I'm not really sure I have any logical ground for deciding what is actually good or evil, except how something or someone affects me. He paused to rest and catch his breath for a moment. All seems quite self serving and self centered, I suppose, and my record isn't very encouraging either. Some things I initially thought were good turned out to be horribly destructive. And some things that I thought were evil, well, they turned out. He hesitated before finishing his thought. But Sarah, you interrupted. Then it is you who determines good and evil. You become the judge. And to make things more confusing, that which you determine to be good will change over time and circumstance. And then beyond that, and even worse, there are billions of you each determining what is good and what is evil. So when your good and evil clashes with your neighbors, fights and arguments ensue and even wars break out. The colors moving within Sarayu were darkening as she spoke, blacks and grays merging and shadowing the rainbow hues. And if there is no reality of good that is absolute, then you have lost any basis for judging. It is just language, and one might as well exchange the word good for the word evil. I can see where that might be a problem, Mac agreed. A problem? Sarah, you almost snapped as she stood up and faced him. She was disturbed as he knew, but he knew that it was not directed at him. Indeed, the choice to eat of that tree tore the universe apart, divorcing the spiritual from the physical. They died, expelling in the breath of their choice for the very breath of God. I would say that is a problem. Forgive my dog, you all. 1 second. 1 second, you. I'm gonna pause. I had a visitor, and the dogs are barking like crazy while I'm trying to read. Okay. I don't even know where I was. My goodness. Okay. We were talking about, so Sarah, you was talking about the Garden of Eden, how she just stated, she said, so when your good and evil clashes with your neighbors, fights and arguments ensue and even wars break out. So what she was explaining is how the concept of good and evil is determined by man, by people. It's subjective. It's not a set in stone. It's not determined by God, the universe. It is determined by man. We have made ourselves the judge, the jury, the executioner. Okay. So I'm gonna continue reading. One sec. Okay. I have to end the live, you all. Unfortunately, I got some very, very bad news, and extend your prayers, please. And we'll be back. We'll do this again on Tuesday. Okay. Whew, I'm trying to keep it together, but we'll be back. Okay. Thank you all so very much. I'm shaking. Okay. Love you all.